So if you're looking to keep your fish in absolutely amazing condition, one of the foods that I recommend to give them occasionally is California blackworms. And this is an absolute amazing food that is a substitute for flake or pellet foods that I think is so important in their diet. Now this is something that I do not feed them all the time because you do not want your fish to get into a habit of only eating these particular types of foods, because you will get yourself into a situation where you will not be able to keep them on a diet of flake and pellet as well. Now, the reason for this is not because these foods aren't good for them all the time. It would, if you had a steady amount of these worms that you could feed them on a daily basis, it would not be a bad thing. The problem is that if you don't have access to blackworms at some point, you don't have your fish eating other foods that are important in their diet daily, or they may not eat at all. So you have to be extremely careful about that. So my recommendation is keeping these blackworms in a metal container such as this, with just enough water to cover these worms is actually the best way to keep them. Now what I like to do is each time I feed, I take and dump off any water that is at the top, doing this, and then I run some more water from the faucet underneath, let it settle a little bit so that they go back into a ball together, and do it again, rinse them once again. This way you get any kind of nasty stuff, maybe a dead worm or something that has developed in the bowl, and this will keep them fresher. Now I only recommend keeping them in water that's just enough to cover them. If you do any more than that, then you're really not keeping them in the best situation they can be in. So the next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you keep them covered with a little bit of cellophane over the top, just about like this here. And when you're doing that, just make sure it's really tight across the top here, and fold anything under. And again, one thing that you want to make sure you do is cut a slit in the top of this. That way there's some kind of oxygen that's able to get into the water to keep these guys in good condition and oxygenated. Now the next step from there is to refrigerate them in an outdoor refrigerator if you can. I don't recommend keeping these in with your regular food. If you have an outdoor refrigerator that you're using to keep pop and beer and other things that are not something that are going to be contaminated by these worms, I really recommend that you do it. But again, keeping them in this metal container is so important, because this is going to get much colder in here than it would in a situation where you've got them in a plastic bin or something like that. Now the reason for that is because it makes their metabolism go down. That way you're not having to feed these worms something that is going to keep them going. If you do what I say to do here, in other words, keep them in the refrigerator, keep them in a metal bowl, keep them with the plastic over the top and a hole cut in the top like I have here, as you can see, so that like I said, you can get some oxygenation to the water so that these worms remain alive. It's very important that you do that, but they'll last at least a week, if not more, if you do this on a daily basis and make sure that you're taking care of them. I don't like putting food in there. Some people will put small pieces of lettuce or something like that in there for them to digest, and I just don't recommend it because it gets very messy and it's hard to keep it clean. Blackworms can be a wonderful substitute diet for your fish, or a treat for your fish that you can give them once a week or so, or once a day I should say, or so, and really keep them healthy, bring them to color, if they're trying to breed fish, this is an absolutely perfect diet for them to really color up actually and get them into good breeding condition as well. They're very high source of protein, and your fish really can't resist them, especially fish that I keep, decorative fish such as discusfish and that sort of thing. If you really want their colors to be extremely enhanced, this is a really good food for them to eat that will give them all the color that they can possibly get. Again, I don't recommend feeding this as a regular diet, and they can make a mess going after these things. Trust me, they can they will know when you're coming at them with these worms, and they will splash, because it's really an exciting thing for them to get these worms. And again, not something I would feed as a regular diet. Make sure you're giving your fish a well-rounded diet, such as flake foods, pellets, and other types of foods, so that if you do not have a source of blackworms, that it's not the only thing that they're going to accept. Some people make that mistake, and it can be a real problem later on, and you don't want to do that. What you want to do is make sure that you're giving them a well-rounded diet and not just blackworms. Now, I feed them blackworms once a day, but I also feed other things as well, so that we don't get into that situation. One of the most important things about keeping blackworms is to make sure that they are healthy at all times. Now, you can do this by examining your worms every day. If you see worms that are very white in color, these are worms that have probably expired and are not good to keep in the container. Again, one thing that you are doing is trying to keep their environment as healthy as you possibly can. So making sure that you are changing the water in here every single day and only putting enough water back in here that just covers the surface of these fish food, the blackworms are going to stay in good condition for a longer period of time. And again, making sure that you're also changing that water by letting anything that is floating on the surface or is not for sure alive is the most important thing. Now, one of the things that I failed to mention in the first part of this is I rinse my worms out in a sink area like this, but what I do is replace them with a water that is either a filtered water of some kind, such as a Brita water or something like that, to make sure that the water that is going in here does not have chlorination in it. Now, you don't want to add dechlorinators or anything like that. That's not necessary and probably not healthy for these worms, but you do want to make sure that you are giving them water that comes out of a bottle or something like that, where it is either distilled or it has been filtered in some way. Again, filtered, distilled, or bottled water is the best recommendation that I can have. And as I said, only put enough in there to make sure that you are covering just enough of the worms to keep them in water. Don't put too much water in there, it's not necessary. And again, I've got to put just a little bit more. Make sure that your worms are in healthy shape, and that's really important. As I said, cleaning them, you can do this with a sieve. You can do this by just letting the water come off the top, as I showed you earlier, or you can continue to do this like twice a day. I really recommend twice a day. If you only do it once a day, that's fine, but do not let these go for more than a day, or you will find that the worms do not last as long as you need them to. I like to be able to keep my worms from Thursday to Thursday when my supplier gets them in, and that way I know that I'm going to have a good supply of worms for my ornamental fish. Again, these worms are a wonderful treat for your fish. They will really enhance their color, and they will really give them an absolute high protein diet that they would not get otherwise. It's so important that you follow the instructions and the rules that I have given you on these these worms so that you know how to keep them, and you also understand that feeding them just these blackworms is not a good idea. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope that you'll feed your fish blackworms occasionally so that you can keep them in the best of health and keep their diet really strong. Again, as I said, make sure you are feeding other foods. Don't get these fish in a habit of just having blackworms, because trust me, it's their favorite food, and if you don't supplement that food with other foods in their diet, then they can get into some really bad habits, and you can find yourself in trouble later on, because if you don't have a well-balanced diet of other foods, then they will only get used to the blackworms, and that can be a real problem when you go to feed when the blackworms are not available, and that can happen. I've had that happen several times during this pandemic. So you want to make sure your diet is well-rounded with these guys. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to give these guys one last little bite, but leave your comments down below, or if you have questions about California blackworms and how good they might be for your fish. Don't be afraid to ask. Leave the comments down below, and I will make sure that I get back to you. Please give me a thumbs up on this video if you liked it and it was informative. Also, hit that bell up above there so anytime I have a new video coming out, you will know about it first and be able to see it right away. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you on the next one.